America as a country has a life expectancy problem. People here are dying far too young in the world's richest country, despite the vast sums of money we spend on healthcare. While Americans are an outlier among industrialized countries, we can see that disparity represented just within the country itself between blue states and red states. So the Washington Post did a study on that disparity specifically, and the results are very clear. And you probably have an idea of which party kills their constituents more through their actions. So the study examined 3 neighboring counties in 3 states. We have a chart showing them. There's one blue leaning in New York, a swing state in Pennsylvania, and a red leaning county, in Ohio. And then there is the map. Now, WAPO chose these 3 counties because they're in 3 different political environments statewide, while still being tied together through geography and their local economies, which have all struggled in the face of declining industrial jobs over the past decade. So let's talk a little bit about the findings of this study. Ashtabula residents, and Ashtabula is the county, the red county in Ohio. Residents are much more likely to die young, especially from smoking, diabetes-related complications, or motor vehicle accidents than people living in its sister counties in Pennsylvania and New York. And they compiled these graphs, which we can pull up, to show the death rate trends compared to the party controlling state government. And you can see the disparities there between New York, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. Now, you might be wondering, how did this pattern play out during the pandemic? It held true during the heart of the pandemic. We're not out of it, of course, it's still ongoing, but during the beginning and the heart of it, before we had a vaccine, that pattern still held true when Ashtabula residents died of COVID at a far higher rate than people living in the counties in New York and in Pennsylvania. And that should make sense to you because of the GOP's history spreading misinformation about COVID, as well as vaccine hesitancy, and championing the idea that masks are tyrannical and that encouraging people to do isolation so as to stop the spread of COVID is an infringement on your individual liberties. Not letting someone's grandma die is the biggest affront to individual liberties that the Republican Party could imagine, I suppose. Now, if you're wondering where this disparity traces back to, like so many horrible things in this country, it traces back to Ronald Reagan. From the Washington Post study, state lawmakers gained autonomy over how to spend federal safety net dollars following Republican President Ronald Reagan's push to empower the states in the 1980s. Those investments began to diverge sharply along red and blue lines, with conservative lawmakers often balking at public health initiatives they said cost too much or overstepped. And if we pull that graph up back for 1 second, you can see that they all start around the same place in 1980. In fact, the study noted that life expectancies in Ohio in 1980 were roughly the same as California in 1980. And now California has the second highest life expectancy rate among all the states, only behind Minnesota. And Ohio is in the bottom 5th of all states. And it's just quickly to clarify for anyone who's wondering, how does death from cigarette-related diseases, motor vehicle accidents, and diabetes relate back to parties? It's because the Republican-controlled areas didn't want to implement public health measures that save lives, that prevent. That's cigarette taxes, that's taxes on sugary drinks, that's passing initiatives on keeping the roadways safe, lowering speed limits, implementing seatbelt laws. They were reticent to do that. In fact, they fought off doing those things, and it lowered the life expectancy of the people who live there because of it. And Ida, when I was going through this data this morning, I expected the result of it to look something like this, but I was just shocked at how clearly you can see this disparity in life expectancy amongst these 3 counties that all have such similar economic and geographical conditions, but such a different quality of life for the people who live there.
Yeah, it's interesting. As I was reading about homelessness, and one of the things that they always relate correlate is homelessness with drug use, and they always attribute that to the coastal states. They, New York and California, they're liberal, but the numbers are staggering in red states. And the quality of life, which is what people in every state should measure, is their quality of life versus the quality of life of the people who represent them. And it doesn't matter if you're a firefighter, if you're a teacher, if you work at the cafeteria, in the school, your quality of life should be the best that it could possibly be right where you are. And it should be just as good as those people who wake up every morning to allegedly represent you. But when you hear this, Ohio, which has an astronomical rate of missing women, 35 Black teens gone missing in Cleveland. Nobody knows where they are. We don't speak their names. It is not a national issue. When we think about cigarettes and we think about these toxins and sugary drinks, you know how much money they make from these corporations and these checks that they get slid to them off to the side on the cut. I'm so tired of hearing people talk about my people and where I come from in the inner city as being thugs and gangsters. The biggest thugs and gangsters are over there in DC making these decisions, holding up the government, being foolish, disrespecting the law, disrespecting the American citizens. We have a problem. We have a serious problem in our government. They are killing Americans. They've been doing it for a long time. Ronald Reagan sprinkling crack in our communities and then blaming us for it. It is unbelievable where we are now. And the fact that the American people are too busy trying to struggle to survive, they don't have the information because they're not getting the education. They are the greatest victims of all of this stuff that is happening. And again, I say to you, American people, get your employees because they are out of control.
And just quickly to add on to that, here in Chicago, the Republicans held a little conference about crime in Chicago, which is down incidentally, which if you actually want to examine crime in Chicago, do it along economic lines. Look at the history of redlining in the city, the massive segregation that we still have in Chicago today. People here always talk about two Chicagos. That still very much exists, the lack of economic opportunity on our south and west sides. But why didn't these Republicans take some time to investigate, instead of crime in Chicago, why don't you do some investigation into the sex crimes of your own party members? Why don't you hold some investigations about that?
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.